Good afternoon to everybody in the UK, and I'm in Lima in Peru. I'm going to be talking about the Manchester Arena attack, or some aspects of it. And first, just to show that I actually am in Peru, I'm in a place called Ica in the south of the country, working on an early warning system project as part of sort of climate change adaptation. And 10,000 kilometers from Dorset, I think you'll see on the bottom left, from Ica to Dorset, which is about 6,200 miles, so a long way away. Comms working. There's a picture of me next to a large rock up in the mountains yesterday. We were looking at preparing or putting in an early warning system comprising radars, weather monitoring and sirens to warn people in the communities that are likely to be affected by landslides and severe flooding. You'll probably recall some of the landslides that occurred recently in Brazil, so it's preparing them for that. So we're at the design stage at the moment. So that's where I am. So I will carry on talking about Manchester. I recall at the time watching Newsnight back in 2017 on the night of the incident, and that's this was the information that was coming out. You can see that the piece there. We're hearing some breaking news of some kind of incident at the Manchester Arena. Details are sketchy, but Greater Manchester Police have confirmed they're at the scene, have urged people to avoid the area, and so on. So, like most major incidents, you get some early information. You don't know the extent of it, and the picture on the left is a screenshot from my phone, which shows that the announcement that the number of people have died and the number of people injured. And watching the news as it was coming through very sketchily, as a lot of these information incidents do, I thought there sounds to be a large number of casualties there, and clearly there was, with 22.
Sorry, Tony. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but we've lost your PowerPoint.
Oh,
we can see you, but not the PowerPoint.
Oh my goodness! I can see the thing. Let me just go back out of it and go back in again. I did the screen sharing one. Let me just.
We did have it at the beginning. We did have it at the beginning, Tony, and then it cut out.
Right. So let me just. Right, I'm going to go back in and open it again. Right, let's see. Right, what can you see it now? Not the PowerPoint. Right, PowerPoint. There we go. Can you see that?
No, that's just the. Oh, yeah, here we go. We can see it now.
Okay, let me just flick it. So, right, that was the picture. Did you see that one originally when I said I'm in Peru?
Yeah, we got up to the first bit. Part of the the second. The next slide.
Can you see that one now? It's got Newsnight on.
Yes, we can.
Okay, right. Apologies. Right, we should be on track now. The point I wanted to make here is that over the years, there's been a lot of criticism about sort of wildly varying numbers of casualties. Of course, the media are very interested, as is everybody else, about have people died, how many people are injured, and so on. But the good thing about this was they didn't start releasing any information about number of casualties until they had a really good grasp of the numbers. I think the first announcement was that 19 had lost their life. So that was good. And this picks up on, I just want to show this here, Ladbroke Grove train crash, which I was involved with when I was with the British Transport Police, and involved very much with releasing information about casualties. And in the ensuing public inquiry, Lord Cullen, who chaired the inquiry, made the comment that, or recommendation, that it's most important in the future that in any incident involving multiple casualties, the greatest care should be taken to avoid giving the impression that the scale of loss of life may be greater than is certain. So I think they did that in Manchester very well. And the reason why, some of you may remember these headlines for Ladbroke Grove, 35 sadly died, but nowhere near the numbers that were shown here, sort of 50, 70, 100 and 170. So I think that was one of the lessons that was learned from Ladbroke Grove about not releasing information until you have some clarity, to avoid this sort of thing that caused a lot of grief and anxiety for those directly affected. So we had the attack on the Manchester Arena on the 22nd of May, and I've put some key dates along there. Lord Kerslake was appointed to conduct an independent review by the Mayor of Greater Manchester to look at any lessons that were to be learned, and that report was published on the 27th of March in 2019. So it took almost 2 years before that report was published, and there are a large number of recommendations. I'll talk a little bit more about that. There was some disquiet, certainly from the family of the bereaved, that they thought the investigation or the inquiry or the review that Lord Kerslake did was inadequate and didn't really get to the heart of what the issues were. And I think that was a right decision, because it didn't pick out a lot of the things that didn't go well or things that went wrong. And so Sir John Saunders, who initially opened up the inquest, was the coroner, decided that he couldn't get, as a coroner in a coroner's hearing, an access to security service information, and therefore went to the government and asked for a full public inquiry to start under the Inquiries Act of 2005. And Sir John Saunders was appointed and is still the chair of the ongoing public inquiry, and that was the date in October 2019. He published his first volume of 3 in June last year, on the 17th of June, which was concerned with security of the arena. And there are 2 more volumes to be published by Sir John into the inquiry. The final day of evidence was in February this year, final day of oral evidence. The reports 2 and 3 will be coming out hopefully later this year, or maybe next year, we don't know, but I think hopefully later this year. So we've got volume 1, which has been widely available, again with lots of recommendations in there. The inquiry looked before, during and after, sort of following the emergency planning sort of route, planning for the response and looking after what happened afterwards. And so he's looking in great detail, particularly on the preparedness for responding to the emergency, and of course the security issues, some of which were touched upon by our previous speaker. I thought I'd share this one as well in terms of emergency planning, because clearly emergency planning is a core function across the country, in the UK and elsewhere. And I chaired the multi-agency emergency planning group looking at emergencies in the Severn Railway Tunnel, which is some 4.5 miles long. And about a week after one of our planning meetings, we actually had a collision back on the 7th of December 1991, and the rescue team went to the wrong end of the tunnel. We thought the information came out, it was at the English end and it was actually on the Welsh end. Fortunately, nobody died, but there were 140 people trapped for about 4 hours below ground. And I had to give evidence at the public inquiry that followed, that was held between England and Wales, because that's where the tunnel links England and Wales. And this was the comment by the chair of the inquiry: it's impossible to devise a plan which anticipates precisely and in detail the unforeseeable characteristics of a real emergency. And I think that's really important to remember, that when we're planning, we have a framework, but to actually get a plan that predicts exactly what's going to happen. And the same thing would apply, I'm sure, or did apply in Manchester. It's about having the framework to respond. We've also got at the same time the Grenfell Tower inquiry, and it's useful to see, not now, but the comparisons between the different approaches to the public inquiries. The chair has to work within his terms of reference, but there's some aspects of Grenfell, bearing in mind both disasters happened in the same, one in Manchester in May, Grenfell in June, and there's some overlaps, particularly in terms of the emergency response. One, of course, was in London and one in Manchester. So we've got 2 reports out at the moment. The one on the left, the Kerslake report, the independent review, and we've got the Manchester Arena Inquiry Volume 1, which looked at security for the arena. And the reason they brought that out early was because they were concerned about security arrangements for current events, bearing in mind the length of time it takes to complete an investigation and a public inquiry. It was considered important to get any early lessons out with the Manchester Arena inquiry. The Kerslake report came up with a large number of recommendations, and I think all of them are very, very helpful. And the top three local multi-agency recommendations, fire and rescue and GM Greater Manchester Police, were very much focused on at the local level, but some of those have wider implications as well. And then he looked at issues that, or the recommendations came out at those that affect the national emergency response, so would apply to Dorset and where I live in Somerset and elsewhere. And they looked at the role of government, local resilience forums, or fora if you want to call it that, health services, councils, and the press and media. There's some useful information in there, and I would recommend that the parts that are relevant to the organisations that are watching look at those and see, you know, what has been said, what is recommended. Are those the sorts of things that we've got in place now, or are these things that we need to work on? So there's the existing report, and then you've got the inquiry report, which will also add to that information. Now, interestingly, these are three comments I picked out from the Kerslake report. There's a lot to be proud of, both for the city and the region of Greater Manchester and its emergency services. The second one here, as well as celebrating the things that went well, however, it is vital that we also learn the lessons of what went less well. And the final one, in the panel's view, the story of the response is overwhelmingly positive. Well, I would challenge that and say it wasn't overwhelmingly positive when the public inquiry took place. And the reason for that is that when you have an independent review without any powers set up at the request of the Greater Manchester Mayor, Andy Burnham, it has its place, but it didn't go to the level of detail that a public inquiry has, and I think that's why we're seeing the main differences. It also, from those comments that I've picked out, suggests that yes, a good response, a positive response, overwhelmingly positive response. Well, a lot of people will say no, it wasn't overwhelmingly positive, and you'll see that some of the information and comments that have come out for the public inquiry are completely opposite to that, to saying it was pretty dreadful in lots of places. Lots of things didn't go well, lots of things went wrong. And there's lots of lessons to be learned. So I think you've got to look at the value of Kerslake in the limited amount of information it was able to obtain, and what a public inquiry can produce. But an independent review is produced a lot quicker than a public inquiry, so you have to balance that off. Fortunately, with Manchester, we do have both, or will have both when the final volumes are issued. So the public inquiry, independent, they're both independent, as are all public inquiries under the Inquiries Act of 2005, is chaired by Sir John Saunders, and it's ongoing at the moment. And the terms of reference for Manchester were pretty wide. Some public inquiries are very specific and limit the scope of what the government wants the inquiry chair to look at. But with Manchester, it's pretty very wide, really. You know, investigate how and in what circumstances 22 people came to lose their lives in the attack at Manchester Arena on 22nd of May 2017, and to make any such recommendations as may seem appropriate. Now, on the left of the screen, report 1's out. Again, like Lord Kerslake's report, pretty detailed, very detailed. Report 2 is going to be looking at the emergency response, and report 3 is going to be looking at radicalisation of the bomber and how, and if possible, could this have been avoided. The general view is yes, it could have been avoided, and it's going to be looking at that. So we've got 2 more volumes to come. I'm not sure whether we'll have the 2 together or we'll have emergency response next and then report 3. I suspect emergency response next. The Manchester Arena inquiry, as with Grenfell, they've got excellent information. Everything's on their website, and if you can click on the link there, and it'll take you right the way through. over the years, I've been involved in, the first one I was involved with was parts of the King's Cross fire in 1987, then Clapham rail crash in 1988, and the amount of information aided by the growth of technology has provided a wealth of information. Evidence is streamed live, it's all on there, so it's a researcher's dream for anybody that wants to go in, but it does take an awful lot of time because huge amounts of information on there about what's happening, and all the people, the statements, so you can see everything that's gone on as if you're actually sitting in the inquiry room. Now, these are some of the comments that have come out following Volume 1 in the more recent months, and could have been avoided is one of the sort of themes. Yes, it could have been avoided. A lot of people will argue, and more of that will come out in Volume 3. Total and utter embarrassment. That was one of the comments of the fire chief in how the fire service response was, and I'm just reading. I'm not making any judgment or comments on them. The police force apologises for its actions. That was with Greater Manchester Police. There are also apologies from British Transport Police. Heroic actions by the public. There was a lot of good work, and we see that in many major emergencies or disasters, that the public are involved in it, and the public are first on the scene, and there was some really good work there. There's the evidence that's just been finished a few weeks ago. I think it was the 15th of February. There's a lot of discussion and debate about whether some of the victims could have survived, and there's some conflicting evidence, but I think the general view is that if the emergency response had been better, some of the people would not have necessarily perished. So that's an issue, and we'll have to see the findings in the report. Baffling emergency response is another comment that comes up, and there were issues around security services failings and intelligence not acted on, and that's going to be that's going to come out in Volume 3. And there's also the issue about the reluctance of the bombers' families to actually help the inquiry, and some of them are overseas as well. So there's issues around that. So you can see in relation to the comments that were made in Lord Kerslake's report, this is showing a different perspective on what actually took place. I think this is a really useful one. There's a lot of information about how risk assessment is carried out, particularly on premises and particularly on major events. And I know in Dorset you have a lot of events at Bournemouth in International Conference Centre and so on. This is very important. And to reading up about this particular comment, the failure to appreciate a risk properly makes a failure to mitigate that risk almost inevitable. There's a lot of detail in Chapter 7 about how risk assessment was carried out, or how it wasn't carried out, and recommendations. So I'd commend that to read anybody to read it if you are involved in the risk assessment process. There's also some comments here in the Inquiry Volume 1 report regarding security, that the evidence has shown a security operation was under-resourced, mal-coordinated, insufficiently focused on counter-terrorism, and especially from a person-born improvised explosive device. A foreseeable outrage, inadequate, flawed, meaningless, and then a comment about the bomber that he wasn't identified as suspicious. It's well recorded, but lots and lots of concerns, and particularly from the families who lost loved ones, saying, how did you get it so wrong? How are you so inadequate in your security? And there's some changes that have taken place already in terms of risk assessment, coordination, responsibility for the arena policing has gone from the British Transport Police. There was an issue of coordination. It's gone to Greater Manchester Police. So things are taking place. I've picked up some issues here because if you're asked to give evidence of a public inquiry, this is very similar to what's happening with Grenfell as well, in terms of people giving evidence where they want to know the individual's role, responsibilities, their background. So, what were you doing before you had your particular role as an emergency planning officer, as a police officer, as a fire officer, whatever. And then an examination of your training that's relevant to what your role was in the response. What sort of briefings you have, what sort of action was taken, why, and importantly, recording that information. Where do you record that information? Was it recorded on your personal log, on a radio log, all those sorts of things? And then these are some of the questions which I took direct from the inquiry for most of the individuals. So for their particular role, whether it was a security guard, whether it was somebody providing access, whatever it was, did you receive any training? Was it face-to-face or online? And how did you do it? Where? When? Was it a good way? Was it a satisfactory way of undertaking your training? Why was that? Then do you remember particular training modules? And in Manchester, there was questions aimed at the security people to say, well, we did online security training. And well, do you remember the information about counter-terrorism? Were there exams? Do you feel you benefited from that training? Were you paid? Looking back, do you feel that the training you received was inadequate? Now, these are the sort of questions that we're seeing in a similar fashion with Grenfell as well. It's about, they're really drilling down into the details. So if you're involved with providing training or being trained, these are the sorts of questions, if you get called up to an inquiry, that's the level of detail that you need to be able to answer or explain. And record keeping is important. So from the local authority and the Resilience Forum's perspective, this is the sort of level of detail that you'd be expected to produce. And of course, if you're called to an inquiry for something that's happened, some time has elapsed, you need to make sure you have adequate records that you're able to produce. And if the records don't exist, the assumption is, well, you haven't made any, and the conclusions can be drawn from that. So there's lots and lots throughout these inquiries that you can look at and say, do we do that? Should we do that? Yes, we must do that. How are we going to do it? And how we record it, particularly regarding training, and that could be first aid training, it could be a whole range of things, but really useful guidance there. Interoperability is a big issue, particularly not just between the emergency services, but between all the Category 1 responders and the Category 2 responders. And these are some of the common themes that came up and are coming up in Grenfell and others. Poor working practices and organisational planning, and that will include planning for emergencies, inadequate training, ineffective communication, no system to ensure that lessons are learned and staff taught. I'm sure we'll all remember after any disaster or major emergency, the Prime Minister or the Home Secretary or someone else in authority at government will say, we're going to have this inquiry, we're going to make sure that we learn the lessons so this thing never ever happens again. And of course, words are easy to say, but very difficult to put into place and make sure that they happen. Having some, what systems, we've got loads and loads of public inquiry reports, in my working life, from train crashes to bomb attacks. How many of these are actually built into the organisation learning? The individuals that have that practical experience retire, move on, become consultants, die. How does the organisation sustain that learning and keep it within the organisation? It's a real challenge. I haven't seen any evidence so far that many organisations can actually do that. So it's, again, getting those systems in place is a real challenge. The absence of a no blame culture, where people are willing and able to say what actually happened and how it was for them. I think we're moving towards that. No monitoring or audit, no checking of what's gone on, no checking of and keeping up to date. I think there's already been talk from Lord Toby Harris about some of the issues around his work for the National Preparedness Commission, but we need to move to an area where we have far better monitoring and auditing arrangements. You'll know that there's no check-in of what the emergency services, the local authorities and others do, the Category 1 responders in terms of preparing for emergencies at the moment. Hopefully the various reviews that are in process at the moment will produce something that we have a better system to check that Authority A or Police Force B are actually checking on what they're doing and meeting their statutory duties under the Civil Contingencies Act. Recommendations, reports ignored. I could tell you lots of different places where things that happened, recommendations are made, and they're just overlooked or people not aware of them because there's no system in place. And the final one there, the lack of leadership that is apparent in lots of different organisations. We had apologies for various organisations in the Manchester arena for failings of leadership at various levels of the organisation. and this seems to happen time and time again. How do we actually get that right, so people, I suppose, leading in a non-emergency situation, whether you're in the public or private sector, is very different to leading in a crisis when the stakes are very high, the pressure, the anxiety, and the personal issues come into play. But we don't seem to be able to get it right in many of the disasters that we see, not just in the UK but abroad as well. Greater Manchester on the right. Greater Manchester have a community risk register. Again, everybody's required to have one. I'm sure you've got one in Dorset that the public read. Those are the sorts of things which the inquiries, the inquiry will be looking at to say, well, this says what you're going to do for the community. This is how you're going to respond. You know, how do you do that? How do you measure up against it? Now, I don't know how you do in Dorset comparing against what you say in the register and your other documents that you do, but those are the sorts of things that are going to be examined closely at the inquiry, and whether it's if it's the local authority, maybe the chief exec that's asked, you know, what mechanisms have you got in place to audit and monitor? You know, do peer review with other authorities to check what you're doing. At the moment, there's no framework for us to do that. Interesting, on the left is the Greater Manchester Major Incident Procedure, and that I picked that up about 20 years ago, and it's a really useful document because it sets out the roles and responsibilities of organisations, and what they will do and what they won't do in emergencies. And they developed that from the London Emergency Services Liaison Panel, of which I was part of when I was with the British Transport Police. And that's up to quite a few editions further on since that now in London. But it's a useful document because it says very clearly about what people will do. It's in non-technical terms. But it's interesting, that's a picture of the Ladbroke Grove, not Ladbroke Grove, sorry, that's the Clapham train crash picture. And I thought that was quite funny seeing that. That's a picture because I was at the scene there at Clapham, and that's the London Met Police control vehicle in that blue in the middle of the picture there. But that was just an interesting point. But it was a really good document. It was simple. It was very clear. I don't think that they have that in place now. But having something that's very simple that people can refer to know what the local authority role is, to what the police, the fire, the ambulance, particularly in emergency situations, what are they going to do? It's the same. We've a lot of people have dropped those and have gotten to far more complex documents. A word about JESSOP, Joint Emergency Interoperability Framework. That's been put under scrutiny at Grenfell. It's been looked at in Manchester as well, about how organisations work together in emergencies. I don't need to go through that now, but this was the comment that Sir Martin Moore-Bick said in relation to his examination of it at the Grenfell inquiry. It's well-intentioned, not easy document to navigate beyond the first few pages. And I love this comment here. It bears all the hallmarks of managerial conceptualism designed to fill a statutory requirement in a vacuum, and does not appear to be based on the experience of those who operate on the incident ground in the real world. A very critical comment that JESSOP have brought out the left. This is the one on the left, is the October 2021. There have been some changes in it. We'll see what happens with Manchester reports, as well as to any further comments on there. With all these interoperability frameworks and guidance, it's got to be simple. People need to know what to do. The last thing you're going to do when you're en route to an incident is look for your manual or your document. People need to know. So we go back to the training, but it's been put under the spotlight, and I think quite rightly so. And we'll see. I think there will be some changes from that. But any other documents that you produce, again, need to be quality checked to make sure they're clear and easy to read and understand. So applying those comments to any things that you use locally is useful. Is it full of managerial gobbledygook? Is it in plain English? Or in the right language if you're sharing stuff with the community, but does it do what it says? Is it clear and is it simple? I think my friend Jim Nattrass was talking about the prevent and the protect duty came out, or sorry, the consultation on the protect duty came out of the issues arising from the Manchester arena attack. And unless something's happened in the last couple of days since I've been away, we're still waiting for those to come out. That's where the putting a duty on people that operate premises with the public go as to preparing themselves for potential terrorism attacks and so on. So that's useful. There's a lot of people for it. Those that have to put it in place, it's going to cost them some money. So there'll be some issues around that. But that'll be coming out. If it hasn't, say, in the last couple of days since I've been away, will be coming out soon this year. And then obviously we will have to be taking some action on that. So that's a very quick whiz through some of the issues that are coming out of Manchester and the public inquiries, or public inquiry in particular. But we shouldn't be looking at these inquiries in isolation. We need to be looking at the other ones that are going on as well, whether they're in London or elsewhere in the country. So the value of the public inquiry gets into a huge amount of detail. The review that we saw with Lord Kerslake sort of touches the surface but doesn't really get to the issues. And it also shows that when you produce a report that says, we think we've done a wonderful job, or you've done a wonderful job, and then you get a counter report that goes into great detail that says, actually, you didn't. You know, how do you manage the two issues? We'll have to see what happens on